I thought I was helping him pay off his debt. He kept saying, "I'll fix everything, just give me time." Something felt off when the numbers didn't match. Then I saw another name on the account and suddenly, I still think about how normal that day felt before everything changed. That's the part that bothers me now. Nothing dramatic happened at first. No big fight. No obvious red flag waving in my face. It was just another weekday. Another coffee. Another man sitting a few feet away, sounding tired on the phone. If somebody had told me that one moment would eventually cost me a chunk of my savings, my peace of mind, and almost 2 years of my life, I would have laughed. But that's the thing about people like Brandon. They don't arrive looking dangerous. They arrive looking worn down. Soft-spoken. A little embarrassed. Like life has been harder on them than it should have been. And if you're the kind of person who likes fixing things, that is exactly how you get pulled in. I wasn't looking for a relationship when I met him. I know everybody says that, but in my case it was actually true. I was 28, living alone in Cincinnati, working as a bookkeeper for a small operations company, and my life had settled into something predictable. Not glamorous. Not exciting. Just steady. I woke up early. I packed my lunch most days. I paid my bills on time. I kept a running spreadsheet of my savings goals because that kind of thing calmed me down. I wasn't one of those people who loved numbers in some abstract, mathematical way. I loved what they meant when they were in order. Stability. Control. A sense that if I kept doing the right thing, my life would keep moving in the right direction too. At work, I sat 2 doors down from Gregory Baker, our operations manager, and close enough to hear Heather Baker, our administrative assistant, talking to vendors on the phone all day. They weren't actually related, which confused people at first, but after a while it just became one of those office quirks nobody thought about anymore. Gregory was the kind of boss who always looked like he had 3 problems open in his head at once. Heather was the kind of person who knew everybody's business without seeming nosy. Between the two of them and the constant routine of invoices, reports, and reconciliations, my days moved fast enough that I didn't spend much time feeling lonely. That didn't mean I wasn't lonely. There's a difference. You can have a full calendar, a stable job, a tidy apartment, and still come home at night to a silence that feels a little too big. Not tragic. Just noticeable. Enough that when somebody finally sits across from you and makes you feel seen, you lean in before you realize how much you've missed it. That's basically what happened with Brandon Young. It was a Thursday in late October when I first saw him. I'd stayed late at work because month-end always got messy, and by the time I left, my head still felt full of numbers. I stopped at a coffee shop near the office because I wanted 10 quiet minutes before going home. I ended up at a little table near the back with my laptop open, pretending I wasn't still mentally fixing a vendor discrepancy. Brandon was at the table next to mine. I noticed him because of his voice first. Low. Controlled. Tense in that way people get when they're trying very hard not to snap in public. He was on the phone saying, "No, I know it's late." "I know." I said I'd take care of it. There was a pause. Then he rubbed his forehead and said, quieter, "I can't make something appear out of nowhere. Just give me until Monday." I should have looked away. I did look away, actually. But when he hung up, he let out this tired breath and gave me a quick glance like he knew I'd heard enough to be awkward. "Sorry," he said. "I didn't mean to turn your coffee break into a financial crisis." He said it with a half smile, and I laughed before I could stop myself. "It's okay," I told him. "I work with budgets." "I've heard worse." He looked at my laptop. "That sounds like a threat." "It kind of is." That made him laugh for real. It was small. Stupid, even. One of those little exchanges that shouldn't matter. But it did. He asked if I was still working. I asked if he'd had a rough day. He said, more like a rough year, with this dry expression that somehow made it sound less pathetic and more honest. That honesty, or what I thought was honesty, was his best weapon. We talked for maybe 40 minutes that first night. Nothing intense. No giant confessions. Just enough to make him feel familiar. He told me he worked in logistics. That the job could get chaotic. That he dealt with shipping delays, missed deliveries, drivers calling out, clients panicking. It sounded stressful, but believable. He didn't try to impress me. That was a big part of why I liked him right away. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't trying too hard. He seemed tired, a little self-deprecating, and weirdly relieved to be talking to somebody who wasn't demanding something from him. When he asked for my number, it didn't feel like a move. It felt like a continuation. That should have scared me more than it did. Our first few dates were easy. Simple dinners. Coffee after work. Walks around places neither of us really needed to be. He was good at paying attention without making it obvious. He'd remember little things I said. He'd ask how my day went and actually listen to the answer. When I got irritated about work, he never mocked it or acted like bookkeeping was boring. He'd say things like, "You keep people from falling apart and they don't even know it," and I'd roll my eyes, but privately I liked hearing it. He made me feel steady in a different way than numbers did. That was new for me. He didn't love bomb me. He didn't rush me. He just kept showing up. That's what made him dangerous. If he had come on too strong, I probably would have backed off. But he moved at exactly the speed that felt natural. He'd stop by my apartment after work with takeout. He'd help me carry groceries upstairs. He'd stand in my kitchen opening cabinets and say, "You really live like a responsible adult," when all he meant was I had matching dishes and enough food in the fridge to make an actual meal. I'd tell him, "Some of us were born 40 years old." And he'd grin and say, "I'm trying to catch up." He was funny in a quiet way. Not the kind of guy who dominated a room. More the kind who noticed what would make you laugh and slipped it in when you needed it. He looked like the sort of man life had been a little unfair to, and I think that made my guard drop faster than I realized. I started learning pieces of him in no particular order. He didn't have a close relationship with most of his family. He didn't talk much about his father. He said his mother worried too much, and that conversations with her always ended in guilt. He'd moved around a few times for work before settling in Cincinnati. He didn't own much. He never made a big deal out of anything he had. At the time, I thought that meant he wasn't materialistic. Now I think it meant he'd gotten very good at living lightly inside other people's spaces. A couple months after we met, he started staying over more often. Not in a dramatic way. It just happened. One night became 3 nights a week. Then most of the week. Then I noticed his phone charger plugged in near my couch and his jacket on the back of one of my dining chairs like it belonged there. I didn't push it. I didn't ask what we were. I didn't make a speech about the future. One night we were eating takeout on my couch, and he said, almost absent-mindedly, "I like it here." I said, "You say that like you're shocked." "I am," he said. "By my couch. By the quiet." That got my attention more than it should have. He looked embarrassed right after he said it, like he hadn't meant to let that thought out. Then he gave me one of those small crooked smiles and shrugged. "I'm serious. It's peaceful here. With you." It sounds corny now. I know that. But in the moment, it landed. Not because it was some grand romantic line. It wasn't. It was because it sounded like something he hadn't planned to say. Those were always the moments that hooked me. The unscripted ones. Around that time, money started entering our conversations more often. Not directly at first. I'd notice him checking his phone and going quiet. I'd hear the stress in his voice if a call came in. Sometimes we'd be out somewhere normal, like the grocery store or picking up dinner, and he'd do that quick mental math people do when they're trying not to look worried about the total. He never asked me for anything. That's important. If he had, I might have put up a wall. Instead, he let me notice. That was smarter. One night he came over looking off. Not dramatic. Just a little thinner around the edges somehow. He was distracted, tired, too quick to say he was fine. We sat at my kitchen table eating leftovers, and I finally asked, "What's going on with you?" He looked down at his plate and gave this small humorless laugh. "You ever get tired of feeling behind all the time?" I said, "Behind on what?" He shrugged. "Everything." I waited. He didn't answer right away. He looked like he was deciding whether to say anything at all. Then he leaned back in his chair and exhaled through his nose. "I hate talking about money," he said. That sentence by itself would have made me softer. Most people hate talking about money because it makes them feel exposed. I knew that. I worked around it every day. Shame gets wrapped around finances fast. People avoid the numbers because the numbers make them feel stupid. So I kept my voice calm and said, "You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to." He gave me this look I can still picture perfectly. Grateful. Hesitant. Like he was relieved I wasn't pushing, and that made him want to trust me more. That was probably practice too. He said, "It's just old stuff. Credit cards. A personal loan. Some dumb decisions from a few years back. I'm managing it. I just get tired of managing it." I asked, "How bad is it?" He laughed once and said, "Bad enough that looking at it makes me want to throw my phone into the river." I smiled a little, but he didn't. That's when I realized he really was embarrassed. And, because I am exactly the kind of idiot he needed me to be, my first instinct wasn't suspicion. It was sympathy. I said, "You don't have to tell me anything you're not comfortable telling me." He looked down again. "It's not that I don't trust you." That line stayed with me, because it created the next step all by itself. He didn't want to tell me. He trusted me. He was ashamed. He didn't want me to think less of him. See how that works? See how neatly that rearranges the moment so you become the one reassuring him? So you become the one stepping forward? I didn't know I was being led there. I thought I was being kind. A week later, he brought it up again on his own. We were in my living room. I just kicked off my shoes after work, and he was sitting at the end of the couch scrolling through something on his phone. He looked frustrated enough that I asked what happened. He held the phone up and said, "You ever feel like no matter how much you pay, nothing moves?" I sat down beside him. "On what?" He hesitated, then unlocked the screen and handed it to me. It was a statement. Then another. Then a couple of payment notifications. Real numbers. Not tiny ones. My stomach sank a little. He watched my face while I read, and I remember thinking how hard that must have been for him. To let me see that. To let me see the mess. That's what I thought. He said, I know it looks bad. It looks stressful, I told him. That too. He rubbed his jaw and stared at the floor. I'm not asking you for anything, Julia. I need you to know that. I'm just tired of acting like I'm okay when I'm not. That was the line that got me. Not because it was dramatic. Because it sounded restrained. Vulnerable without sounding manipulative. The exact right amount. I said, I know you're not asking. And I did know. He hadn't asked. Not technically. He said the debt had started before I knew him. He'd had a period where work went sideways. Hours dropped. He leaned too hard on credit cards. There'd been some loan he took out thinking he could catch up fast, and instead it kept stacking interest. He told the story in pieces, never too polished, never too self-pitying. Just enough detail to make it feel real, and just enough shame to make me not dig too aggressively. He said, I'm trying. I swear I'm trying. It just feels like every time I get ahead by an inch, something pulls me back. I said, have you talked to anybody about consolidating it? He looked at me and laughed softly. That is the most bookkeeper response I could have imagined. I'm serious. I know. That's why I like you. Little lines like that. They mattered. I took his phone and scrolled again, mentally organizing what I was seeing. I could already tell some of the balances were probably bleeding him with interest. It irritated me on his behalf. Not at him. At the structure of it. At the feeling of watching a problem that clearly had moving parts and knowing it could maybe be handled if somebody actually sat down and dealt with it. That somebody, in my mind, was not me. Not yet. I asked a few careful questions. He answered enough to keep the picture believable. I asked whether he'd missed payments. He admitted there had been a couple. I asked whether he was current now. He said mostly. I asked whether he'd ever tried to build an actual payoff plan, and he gave me this look that said he knew I was right but didn't have the energy to admit how disorganized things had gotten. Then he said, very quietly, you probably think I'm a mess. I remember turning toward him and saying, no. I think you're overwhelmed. That was true. I did. He closed his eyes for a second, like hearing that was a relief. Now, of course, I know that relief came from somewhere else. From realizing the story was landing. From realizing I was exactly where he wanted me. But at the time, it felt intimate. It felt like he had shown me something ugly, and I had chosen not to judge him for it. That kind of trust changes the shape of a relationship fast. After that night, I started thinking about his debt when he wasn't around. I'd be at work reconciling spreadsheets and catch myself wondering what his interest rates were. I'd be driving home thinking about whether he could move balances or get out from under some of it if he attacked the worst one first. I told myself it was just concern. That's all. Concern. Not obligation. Still, once you understand a problem, it gets harder to ignore it. That's especially true when the problem has a face. A voice. A tired smile in your kitchen asking whether you want extra soy sauce with your takeout. That winter, our relationship settled into something that felt serious even though neither of us said it out loud all the time. He knew where I kept the spare blankets. I knew how he took his coffee. He started leaving things at my apartment without asking. A pair of shoes near the door. A sweatshirt folded over one of my chairs. A razor in my bathroom that he laughed off the first time I pointed it out. What? He said. You want me to carry one around in my pocket? I said, I want you to stop slowly moving in by accident. He looked at me for a second and smiled. By accident, he repeated. I should have paid more attention to that. At work, Heather started noticing. She'd ask whether I had plans for the weekend and I'd mention Brandon. She'd give me this knowing little smile and say, so that's serious now, huh? I'd shrug and say, I don't know if serious is the word. She'd say, that means yes. Gregory once walked past my desk while I was half smiling at a text and said, whoever has you looking that unbothered during invoice week, hang on to him. I laughed. That sentence is almost funny now. Because by then, I was already hanging on. I just didn't realize how much of my grip was based on the version of him he'd built for me. The first time I actually helped him financially, it seemed small enough to be harmless. He came over one Friday looking drained. Not performatively upset. Just off. He sat on my couch, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. I sat beside him and asked, what happened? He said, one of the cards is over the limit. I waited. He added, I can cover it next week. I just need to get through this weekend without another fee hitting. He said it like he was ashamed I even knew. Like the words were pulling themselves out of him against his will. I asked how much he needed. He said, immediately no. I'm not asking you. That should probably tell you everything about why this worked. Every step was designed to make me feel like helping was my choice. I said, I didn't say you were asking. He rubbed both hands over his face. Julia, seriously. I'm not doing that. Doing what? This. Becoming some guy who leans on his girlfriend because he can't get it together. I remember the exact feeling that went through me then. Protective. Almost offended on his behalf. Like I wanted to defend him from his own shame. I said, you're not leaning on me. I'm offering to help with one thing. He shook his head. I said, how much? He hesitated. Then he told me. It wasn't a tiny number, but it also wasn't impossible. An amount I could cover without wrecking myself. Enough to stop the immediate problem. Enough to feel meaningful. Enough to make him look at me like I had just done something huge. He said, I'll pay you back next Friday. I said, okay. I transferred it right there. He stared at his phone when the notification came through, then looked at me with this expression I can still remember because it felt so real. I hate that you had to do that, he said. You didn't make me. I know. That might be worse. Then he pulled me into a hug so tight it actually surprised me. That should have been the moment I stepped back and thought carefully. But instead it felt like a milestone. Like we had crossed into something more adult. More committed. Less casual and more real. He stayed over that night. He was quieter than usual, almost tender in an exaggerated way I mistook for gratitude. Before we went to sleep, he kissed my forehead and whispered, you have no idea how much I needed you. I closed my eyes and let that settle over me like it meant something beautiful. That's what I did not understand yet. Need is not always love. Sometimes need is just appetite in a softer voice. By the time Christmas lights started going up all over the city, I had already convinced myself Brandon and I were building something solid. Not perfect. Not fairy tale perfect. Just real. He knew where all my mugs were. He knew which side of the bed I slept on. He knew I got quiet when I was upset and that I liked grocery shopping alone because it cleared my head. I knew when his face meant he'd had a rough day before he said a word. I knew how to make him talk when he shut down. I knew which version of his smile meant he was fine and which version meant he was lying. At least I thought I did. Because the truth was, I was still only seeing what he was willing to show me. And I was about to mistake that for intimacy. After that first payment, something shifted between us. Not in a dramatic way. Nothing you could point at and say, that's where it changed. It was quieter than that. Subtle. The kind of shift you only notice when you look back and realize the ground has already moved under you. At first, it felt like closeness. He texted me more. Checked in during the day. Sent little things like, did you eat? Or how's work going? Nothing intense. Just enough to make it feel like we were connected even when we weren't together. And when he came over, he was softer. More affectionate. More attentive. He'd stand behind me while I was in the kitchen, arms loosely around my waist, chin resting on my shoulder, like he needed the contact. Like I was something steady he could lean into. You're good for me, he said one night, almost like he didn't mean to say it out loud. I smiled and said, I would hope so. No, he said, pulling back just enough to look at me. I mean it. You make things feel manageable. That word stuck with me. Manageable. It felt honest. Grounded. Not some big, empty promise. Just a simple admission that I made his life easier. And I liked that. I didn't realize I was stepping into a role. A few weeks passed before money came up again. It wasn't immediate. He gave it space. Let things settle. Let me feel like that first time had been an isolated moment, not the beginning of a pattern. Then one evening, we were sitting on my couch, half watching something neither of us was really paying attention to. He was quieter than usual, phone in his hand, thumb hovering over the screen like he was deciding whether to open something. I noticed. What's going on? I asked. He hesitated, then shook his head. It's nothing. I'll deal with it. I leaned back and looked at him. That's not how your face works when it's nothing. He let out a breath and rubbed his jaw. It's just another payment. It hit sooner than I expected. I waited. He didn't ask. That part mattered. He never asked directly. Instead, he said, I'll figure it out. I could hear the strain under it. The same tone as before. Controlled, but tight. I said, how much? He immediately shook his head. No. I'm not doing that again. Doing what? This. Putting you in a position where you feel like you have to help. I sat up a little straighter. I didn't feel like I had to help. I wanted to. He looked at me for a second, searching my face like he was trying to decide whether to believe that. That's the problem, he said quietly. I frowned. Why is that a problem? Because I don't want to get used to it. That line, that was the one that made me lean in again. Because it sounded like boundaries. It sounded like he was trying to do the right thing. Like he was resisting something that would make him dependent on me. So I said, helping you once doesn't mean you're getting used to anything. He shook his head again, slower this time. It's not just once anymore. That was technically true. I said, okay. Then let's not make it a habit. Let's just fix what's in front of us. He didn't respond right away. Just stared at his phone. Then he said, you shouldn't have to fix anything for me. I'm not fixing you, I said. I'm helping with the situation. He looked at me, and there was something in his expression I couldn't fully read at the time. Something between hesitation and calculation. You always make it sound simple, he said. Because sometimes it is. He let out a small laugh, not fully convinced, but not pushing back either. How much? I asked again. He hesitated just long enough to make it feel real. Then he told me. This time, it was a little higher. Not enough to scare me. Just enough to feel like it mattered. I transferred it again. He didn't hug me right away this time. Instead, he just stared at his phone when the confirmation came through, then set it down and leaned back against the couch. I don't like this, he said. I turned toward him. What part? Feeling like I owe you. You don't. I do. Then pay me back when you can, I said, keeping my voice calm. He looked at me again, softer this time. I will. I believed him. That was the pattern. Every time money came up, there was hesitation. Resistance. A reminder that he didn't want to rely on me. And then, slowly, a shift where helping felt like the natural, reasonable thing to do. It never felt like pressure. It felt like choice. That's what made it work. Over the next couple of months, things escalated in small, controlled steps. It wasn't like I suddenly started covering everything. It was pieces. Specific problems. Targeted fixes. A late fee here. A minimum payment there. Then a slightly larger balance that he said was the worst one because of the interest. Each time, he framed it like it was temporary. Like we were just getting him to a point where he could breathe again. And every time I helped, he reinforced the idea that it mattered. Not in a dramatic, over-the-top way. In small, consistent ways. He'd show up with coffee for me before work. Remember things I mentioned in passing. Check in on me when I was stressed. Make it feel like what I was giving wasn't one-sided. You always take care of me, he said one night while we were cleaning up after dinner. I laughed a little. That's not true. It is, he said, serious now. And I don't say that lightly. I shrugged it off, but something in me held onto it. Because it felt like balance. Like we were giving to each other in different ways. That's how I justified it. At work, I started noticing how often my mind drifted back to his finances. I'd be going through accounts, spotting inefficiencies, thinking about how I'd handle them differently if they were mine. Or his. One afternoon, Heather leaned over my desk and said, "You've been staring at that screen for 5 minutes without blinking. You good?" I blinked, snapped back. "Yeah, just thinking." "Dangerous habit," she said. "You have no idea." She smirked. "Brandon?" I hesitated for half a second too long. She nodded like that confirmed everything. "Yeah, that's what I thought." "It's nothing," I said. "It's never nothing when you say it like that." I didn't respond. Because I didn't have a clean explanation for what it was. It wasn't just concern anymore. It was involvement. A few weeks later, I brought up the idea of consolidating his debt more seriously. We were at my apartment, sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop open between us. I'd asked him to pull up everything so we could look at it together. He hesitated at first. "Are you sure you want to do this?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "If we're going to keep putting money into this, we should actually have a plan." That word, plan, felt important to me. He watched me for a second, then nodded and started pulling things up. Statements. Accounts. Payment histories. The more I saw, the more frustrated I felt. Not at him. At the structure of it. There were multiple accounts bleeding interest. Some with higher rates than others. Some that had barely moved despite payments. It looked like a mess. A solvable mess. "If we knock out this one first," I said, pointing at the screen, "we reduce the interest pressure immediately. Then we can redirect everything into the next one." He leaned back, watching me. "You make it sound easy," he said. "It's not easy," I said. "It's just organized." He smiled faintly. "That's your thing." "Yeah," I said. "It is." We sat there for almost an hour going through everything. Or at least, I thought we were going through everything. He answered my questions. Explained what he could. Said he didn't always understand the details, which made sense given his job and how overwhelmed he said he felt. At one point, I asked, "Is this all of it?" He nodded without hesitation. "Yeah, that's everything." I believed him. That was the moment where everything locked in. Because from that point on, I wasn't just helping. I was investing. I started structuring how we approached it. Deciding which accounts to prioritize. Calculating how much extra we could throw at certain balances if we adjusted timing. And I say we because that's how it felt. Like we were doing this together. He reinforced that constantly. "We're getting ahead," he'd say. "This is the first time I feel like I'm actually making progress," he'd tell me. And I could see it. Balances going down. Notifications showing payments clearing. Numbers moving in the right direction. It felt real. It felt like proof. One night, after we made a larger payment than usual, he leaned back on my couch and just stared at the ceiling. "I didn't think I'd ever get out of this," he said quietly. I sat beside him. "You are." He turned his head to look at me. "No. We are." That word again. We. It wrapped everything together in a way that made sense to me at the time. I smiled and said, "Yeah, we are." He reached for my hand and squeezed it. "I'm going to make this right," he said. "I'm not going to let you carry this forever." "I'm not carrying it alone," I said. He shook his head slightly. "Still, I'll fix it." I believed that too. By the time spring started creeping in, we had paid off a significant portion of what I thought was his total debt. And the more progress we made, the more I felt like we were building something solid. Something shared. Something that would eventually become a future we both lived in. I didn't realize I was solving a problem that wasn't fully his. I didn't realize the numbers I was carefully organizing didn't belong to just one life. By the time we got into late spring, it didn't feel like I was helping him anymore. It felt like we were fixing something together. That distinction mattered to me more than I realized. Because helping someone feels temporary. Fixing something together feels like commitment. Like investment. Like you're building towards something that's going to exist long after the problem is gone. That's the version of us I believed in. At that point, Brandon was at my apartment more than his own. Not officially moved in, not in a way we ever sat down and defined, but enough that his presence felt normal. His shoes by the door. His jacket on the chair. His charger permanently plugged in near the couch. It didn't feel like he was staying over anymore. It felt like we lived there together. He never pushed for that. That's what made it feel natural. It just happened. And the more time we spent in that shared space, the more everything started to blur. His problems became ours. His stress became something I reacted to without thinking. His relief became something I took pride in. That's where things deepened. Because once you start thinking in we, it gets harder to separate what belongs to you and what doesn't. Around that time, we had one of those conversations that feels small in the moment, but ends up changing everything. We were sitting on the floor in my living room with his laptop open again, going through balances. I had built a rough plan for how to finish everything faster if we pushed a little harder for a few months. I remember pointing at the screen and saying, if we knock out this one completely, it'll free up enough to double down on the others. He watched me quietly for a few seconds. You really believe we can do that? He asked. Yeah, I said. If we stay consistent. He leaned back on his hands and let out a slow breath. I've never had consistency with this stuff. You do now, I said. He looked at me, and there was something in his expression that felt heavier than usual. Because of you, he said. I shook my head. Because of us. He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. That should have stood out to me. Instead, I focused on the part that felt good. The part where I was helping create stability. The part where I was becoming essential. After that, the payments got bigger. Not all at once. Never all at once. It was always framed as strategy. Let's just clear this one completely so we stop the interest. Let's get ahead of this next one before it compounds again. Let's finish this part so we can breathe. Each decision made sense on its own. Each one felt logical. And because I understood the numbers, I could justify every step. I dipped into my savings more than I planned. At first, it was controlled. Calculated. I knew exactly how much I could afford to move without putting myself at risk. Then it became a little less precise. Because every time I hesitated, there was a reason not to. If we stopped halfway, the interest would eat away at what we'd already done. If we didn't push now, we'd just stretch the problem out longer. If we kept going, we could actually finish it. Finish. That word became the goal. And I was close enough to it that stopping felt wrong. Brandon never directly asked for the bigger amounts. He didn't have to. He'd show me the numbers. Let me react. Let me come to the conclusion myself. And every time I did, he'd push back just enough to make it feel like I was insisting. I don't want you draining your savings for me, he said once, when I suggested paying off one of the larger balances. You said this was one of the worst ones, I replied. It is. Then it makes sense to clear it. He shook his head. Not if it costs you too much. It's not costing me too much, I said. It is, he said quietly. You just don't feel it yet. That line should have stopped me. Instead, it made me more determined. I'll feel it less if we're done faster, I said. He looked at me for a long moment. You're stubborn, he said. I'm practical. He smiled slightly. That's one word for it. Then he let me do it. That's how it always went. Resistance. Hesitation. Then acceptance. And every time, it reinforced the same idea. That I was choosing this. That I was in control. That I was the one pushing us forward. That illusion is what kept me from seeing what was actually happening. By early summer, we had cleared most of what I believed was his total debt. The progress felt real. Visible. Trackable. Every time we made a payment, I'd watch the numbers drop and feel this quiet satisfaction settle in my chest. Like I had taken something chaotic and turned it into something manageable. Something solvable. Brandon leaned into that. Not aggressively. Subtly. He'd sit next to me while I worked through the numbers, watching me like I was doing something impressive. I don't know how your brain works like that, he said once. It's just numbers, I replied. It's not just numbers, he said. You're fixing something I couldn't fix on my own. I didn't correct him. Because part of me liked hearing that. That I was the difference. That without me, he'd still be stuck. That with me, he was moving forward. That's a dangerous place to be in a relationship. Because once you believe you're the reason someone's life is improving, it becomes a lot harder to question whether you should still be helping. You stop asking, is this my responsibility? And you start thinking, if I stop, everything falls apart. That thought kept me going longer than it should have. At work, I noticed the shift in myself before I admitted it. I was more distracted. More focused on his numbers than my own. Heather caught me staring at my phone one afternoon and said, "Okay, what's going on with you lately?" "Nothing," I said automatically. She raised an eyebrow. "You've said nothing 3 times this week. That means something." I hesitated. Then I said, "Brandon's dealing with some financial stuff." She leaned against my desk. "Like, bad?" "Not impossible," I said. "Just complicated." "And you're helping?" "A little." She studied my face for a second. "How little is a little?" she asked. I didn't answer. She nodded slowly like that told her everything she needed to know. "Just be careful," she said. "I am," I replied. She didn't look convinced. "People get weird when money's involved," she added. "I know," I said. "That's why I'm keeping track of everything." She gave me a look that was somewhere between concern and resignation. "Okay," she said. "Just don't lose yourself in somebody else's problem." I smiled like I understood what she meant. I didn't. Because in my mind, this wasn't losing myself. This was building something with someone I trusted. That trust was the foundation of everything. And it felt solid. That's what made what came next so much worse. Because when things started to feel off, it wasn't obvious. It wasn't one big moment. It was small, subtle, easy to ignore. At first, it was just timing. Brandon started staying out later some nights. Not constantly, just occasionally. He'd text and say he got stuck at work. Something about a late shipment. A driver issue. A last-minute problem that needed him to stay. It made sense. His job had always been unpredictable. I didn't question it. Then it was his phone. He'd step into the other room to take calls sometimes. Again, not every time. Just enough that I noticed. But not enough that I could point to it and say it was a problem. One night, I asked, "Everything okay at work?" He nodded. "Yeah, just busy. You've been getting more calls lately." "Summer's always like this," he said. "More volume. More issues." I accepted that. Because I wanted to. Because nothing else had changed in a way that felt concrete. He was still affectionate. Still present when he was with me. Still talking about the future in small, casual ways. "We should take a trip when this is all over," he said one night. "Where?" I asked. "Anywhere that doesn't involve me checking my bank account every 5 minutes," he said. I laughed. "Deal," I said. "We'll get there," he added. That word again. We. It kept everything feeling connected. Even when something underneath it was starting to shift. The biggest change wasn't what he did. It was what he stopped doing. He stopped talking about the debt as much. Not completely. Just less. At first, I thought that was a good sign. Less stress. Less urgency. It meant we were getting ahead. Right? But then I noticed something else. The numbers stopped lining up the way they had before. It wasn't obvious. Not at first. Just small inconsistencies. A balance that didn't drop as much as I expected. A payment that seemed slightly off. Dates that didn't quite match what I thought we had done. The first time I noticed it, I told myself I was overthinking. The second time, I told myself I might have misremembered. The third time, I felt that quiet, uncomfortable pull in my chest. The one that doesn't come with a clear explanation. Just a feeling. Something's not right. I didn't say anything immediately. I watched. I paid closer attention. I started double-checking things more carefully. Not in an obvious way. Just quietly. Because part of me didn't want to be wrong. And part of me was starting to realize that if I wasn't wrong, then something much bigger was off. I still trusted him. But for the first time, that trust wasn't automatic. It had a question mark attached to it. And once that question is there, it doesn't go away. It just waits. Once that doubt showed up, I couldn't unsee it. It wasn't loud. It didn't turn into some dramatic confrontation overnight. It just sat there in the background of everything, quietly changing how I looked at things I used to accept without thinking. The numbers were the first thing. They were always the first thing. Because numbers don't care how you feel. They don't adjust themselves to make a situation more comfortable. They just sit there, consistent or inconsistent, waiting for someone to notice. And I noticed. At first, it was small enough that I could explain it away. A balance that didn't drop as much as I expected. A payment that cleared, but the total didn't reflect it the way it should have. I told myself maybe there were fees I didn't account for. Maybe I had the timeline wrong. Maybe I was mixing up which account we had focused on last. All reasonable explanations. All wrong. The more I paid attention, the harder it became to ignore. One night, I was sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop open, going through everything we had tracked so far. I had built my own version of his accounts, just to keep things organized in my head. I remember staring at the screen and thinking, this doesn't make sense. Not in a vague way. In a very specific, technical way. The numbers weren't behaving like they should. And that's when something shifted inside me. Not panic. Clarity. Because once you know something is off, your brain stops trying to comfort you and starts trying to solve the problem. I didn't confront him. Not yet. I needed to understand what I was looking at first. A few days later, I got the opportunity without even trying. Brandon came over after work, dropped his keys on the counter, and said he needed to run back out to grab something he forgot in his car. He left his laptop open on my couch. That didn't immediately feel significant. Until I noticed the email. It was already open. I wasn't looking for anything. I wasn't digging. It was just there, sitting on the screen like it had been waiting for me to notice it. The subject line caught my attention first. Regarding your joint account. Joint account. My first thought was simple. That doesn't make sense. I clicked it. I know people will have opinions about that. About whether I should have looked. About boundaries and privacy. But in that moment, it didn't feel like snooping. It felt like verifying something that already didn't add up. The email was addressed to Brandon Young and Maria Parker. I remember reading that name and feeling like my brain stalled for a second. Maria Parker. I didn't recognize it, which made it worse. Because if it had been a name I knew, maybe there would have been an explanation ready to grab onto. A coworker. A family member. Someone from his past. But it wasn't. It was just there. Attached to the same account numbers I had been paying. I scrolled. The email mentioned recent payments. Remaining balance. Dates that lined up with things I had done. My chest felt tight. Not panic. Something colder. Something slower. I checked the date. That same week. Not old. Not outdated. Current. I didn't move for a few seconds. Then I started looking. Not wildly. Not frantically. Carefully. Systematically. I searched the account number in his files. That's when everything started falling into place in the worst possible way. Statements. Payment confirmations. Notices. All tied to that same account. All addressed to both of them. Brandon Young and Maria Parker. Over and over again. The same pattern. The same pairing. The same reality repeated in document after document. My hands didn't shake right away. That came later. At first, I just felt still. Like my body had paused while my brain caught up. Because there are only so many ways to interpret that. And none of them were good. I tried to find another explanation. I really did. An old account. An ex he never removed. A mistake. But then I found something that took those possibilities and erased them completely. A lease agreement. Signed less than a year ago. 2 names. Brandon Young. Maria Parker. Address in Louisville, Kentucky. Not old. Not outdated. Active. Real. That's when the shaking started. Because that wasn't just a financial connection. That was a life. An apartment. A shared space. A reality I wasn't part of. And suddenly everything that had felt slightly off started making sense in a way I didn't want it to. The late nights. The phone calls. The way his schedule never quite lined up. The way he could disappear just long enough to feel normal, but not long enough to trigger suspicion. He wasn't just busy. He was somewhere else. With someone else. Living another version of his life. And I had been funding it. That realization didn't hit all at once. It came in layers. Each one worse than the last. I wasn't paying off his debt. I was paying off a shared debt. A shared life. I closed the laptop slowly. Not because I was calm. Because I needed to be. Because I needed to think. He walked back in a minute later like nothing had changed. Like the ground under me hadn't just disappeared. Found it, he said, holding up his keys. I turned toward him. And somehow I acted normal. I don't know how. I don't know where that control came from. But I smiled. I asked a question about something irrelevant. I responded to whatever he said next. And inside, everything was shifting. I didn't confront him that night. I didn't confront him the next day either. For 2 days, I said nothing. I watched him. Listened. Noticed everything I hadn't been noticing before. The way he checked his phone. The way he stepped away for calls. The way his explanations always made sense, just enough to avoid questions. It was all still there. I had just been choosing not to see it. Now I couldn't stop. But the most important decision I made in those 2 days wasn't about him. It was about her. Because if I was going to understand what this really was, I needed to hear it from the other side. Finding her was easier than I expected. That part almost made it worse. Because it meant he hadn't even tried that hard to keep the 2 lives separate. Not really. Not in a way that would hold up if anyone ever looked closely. I had her name. Maria Parker. I had the city. Louisville, Kentucky. That was enough. I sat on my couch with my laptop open, the same place where everything had just unraveled, and typed her name in. It didn't take long. A couple profiles came up, but one of them stood out immediately. Her face was in the profile picture. Smiling. Natural. Not overly posed. The kind of photo you don't think too hard about when you upload it. I clicked. Public account. That was the first mistake he made. Or maybe it wasn't a mistake. Maybe he never expected the 2 worlds to collide. I scrolled. Photos of her at work. Scrubs. Hospital hallway. A coffee cup balanced on a counter next to what looked like a patient chart. Nurse practitioner. That matched what I'd assumed from the schedule patterns I had seen. Then more personal photos. Friends. family. And then, him. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't hidden in the background or tucked into a group shot. It was just there. Brandon, standing next to her, arm around her shoulders, both of them smiling like that moment was completely normal. The caption was simple. Finally settling in. 3 months ago. I stared at that picture longer than I should have. 3 months. I could place exactly where I was 3 months ago. I was sitting at my kitchen table, transferring one of the largest payments I had made for him. I remember that night clearly because I had hesitated before hitting send. And then I did it anyway. That money didn't just go toward his debt. It went toward that apartment, that life, that photo. I didn't feel the kind of anger people expect in situations like this. No yelling. No immediate urge to confront him. What I felt was heavier, quieter. Like something had settled into my chest and wasn't going to move. I kept scrolling. More photos. More proof. Different angles of the same reality. Dinner at home. A couch that wasn't mine. A kitchen that wasn't mine. Him in spaces I had never seen, living a life I had never been told existed. There was no denying it. No twisting it into something less. He wasn't confused. He wasn't in between relationships. He was committed. To both of us. And, somehow, I was the one financing it. I closed the app and just sat there for a minute. Then I opened it again. Because I needed to be sure. Because part of me was still hoping I had misunderstood something. I hadn't. So I did the only thing that made sense at that point. I messaged her. Not aggressively. Not emotionally. Just directly. Hey, this might sound strange, but how long have you and Brandon been together? I stared at the screen after sending it, half expecting no response. She replied within minutes. About a year. Why? A year. I leaned back against the couch and closed my eyes for a second. A year. That overlapped almost perfectly with my timeline. There it was. Not a suspicion anymore. Not a theory. A fact. I opened my eyes and typed back. I think we need to talk. There was a pause this time. Longer. Then she replied. Who is this? I didn't ease into it. There was no point. My name is Julia. I've been in a relationship with Brandon for almost 2 years. The typing indicator popped up. Stopped. Started again. Stopped. Then. That's not possible. I expected that. I said, I have proof. Another pause. Show me. So I did. Screenshots. Payment confirmations. Dates. Messages. Everything I had. Not everything at once. Just enough. Enough that it couldn't be dismissed easily. She didn't respond right away. Minutes passed. Then more. I sat there watching the screen like it was going to give me answers before she did. Finally, she replied. He told me you were his ex. I let out a short laugh. Not because it was funny. Because it was exactly what I should have expected. He said you were unstable, she continued. That you kept trying to pull him back in. That he had to help you with some of your debt to get you to leave him alone. I stared at that message. Then I laughed again. This time, it sounded different. Sharper. Because it flipped everything. Every payment I had made. Every explanation he had given me. He had taken my reality and rewritten it for her. In her version, I wasn't the one helping him. I was the problem he was dealing with. I typed back, that's not what happened. I know, she said. That surprised me. You do? I asked. There was a pause. Then she said, I'm looking at what you sent. I waited. A few minutes later, another message came through. Can you send more? So I did. Everything. Every major payment. Every date. Every piece of proof that showed where the money had gone. Where I had been. What I had been told. She stopped responding for a while after that. Not because she didn't believe me. Because she was processing it. I knew that feeling. The slow realization. The way everything rearranges itself in your head until it forms a picture you don't want to look at. When she came back, her tone was different. Shorter. More controlled. How long did you say you've been together? She asked. Almost 2 years. Another pause. Then. He's been living with me for the past 8 months. There it was. The overlap. Clear. Undeniable. 2 timelines running side by side. 2 versions of the same man. 2 completely separate lives. And somehow he had kept them both intact. Until now. We spent the next hour comparing details. Not emotionally. Not dramatically. Just factually. Dates. Stories. Excuses. Where he said he was. What he told each of us. And every single piece lined up. Perfectly. Too perfectly. Because that's what he had built. A system. A routine. A structure that allowed him to move between 2 lives without either one collapsing. Until we connected them. At one point, she said, I feel stupid. I stared at that message for a second. Then I typed back, me too. She replied almost immediately. He's good. I didn't argue with that. He is, I said. We didn't confront him right away. That was the surprising part. Neither of us rushed to expose him. Not because we were scared. Because we wanted to understand. And maybe, in some quiet way, because we wanted him to feel it. The shift. The moment when everything he had built started to fall apart. We both stopped. Stopped responding the same way. Stopped covering things. Stopped making it easy. I stopped sending money. She stopped whatever version of support she had been giving him. And we didn't warn him. We just stepped back and waited. It didn't take long. Within a couple weeks, things started to crack. He got more stressed, more distracted, more tense. I could see it in the way he moved, the way he spoke, the way he checked his phone more often. The system was breaking, and he didn't know why yet. It didn't take long for him to come to me first. That was the part that felt almost predictable. A few weeks after everything started unraveling, he showed up at my apartment looking like the version of himself I had met in the beginning. Tired, stressed, a little on edge. But this time, I wasn't seeing it the same way. This time, I knew exactly what was behind it. He dropped his keys on the counter, ran a hand through his hair, and let out a frustrated breath. "Something's off," he said. I stayed where I was, sitting at the kitchen table. "Off how?" I asked. He pulled out a chair and sat across from me, leaning forward slightly like he needed me to understand. "My accounts," he said. "They're not lining up." I didn't say anything. He kept going. "I've been making the same payments, but the balances aren't dropping the way they should. And now I'm getting hit with late notices I shouldn't be getting." I watched him carefully. This was the first time I was seeing him without the filter I had built around him. And what I saw was different. Still convincing. Still controlled. But underneath it, there was something else. Calculation. He said, "I don't get it. I thought we were ahead." That word again. Only now, it sounded wrong. I leaned back slightly and said, "Maybe you should ask Maria." I've never seen a face change that fast. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't controlled. For a second, everything dropped. The confidence. The narrative. The version of himself he had been holding together. He froze. Then he blinked, like his brain was trying to catch up. "What?" he said. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't move. Didn't give him anything to work with. "Maria," I repeated. "The one on your joint account." There was a long silence. Then he sat back slowly, like he was trying to recalibrate. "It's not what you think," he said. That was his first move. Predictable. I almost smiled. "Okay," I said. "Then tell me what it is." He hesitated. "Not for long. Just enough to build something." It's complicated," he said. "It's an old situation." "No," I said quietly. "It's not old." He opened his mouth to respond, but I kept going. "Lease in Louisville. 8 months. Pictures. Posts. Dates. Do you want me to keep going, or do you want to stop pretending?" That's when he realized it. Not just that I knew. That I knew everything. And for the first time since I met him, he didn't have an immediate answer. That silence told me more than anything he could have said. He leaned forward again, slower this time. "I was going to tell you," he said. That one almost made me laugh. "When?" I asked. He didn't answer. "I was trying to fix things first," he added quickly. "I didn't want to hurt you until I had it sorted out." "There is no version of this where I don't get hurt," I said. "I know," he said, softer now. "But I didn't want to lose you." That line used to mean something to me. Now it just sounded like strategy. "You didn't lose me," I said. "You lied to me." "It's not that simple," he said. "It actually is," I replied. He shook his head, like he needed me to see it his way. "I got into something before I met you," he said. "It wasn't serious. It was just timing. Then I met you, and everything changed, but I was already in too deep on the other side." I stared at him. "So you just kept both?" I asked. "I was trying to get out of it," he said. "For 8 months. He didn't respond. "That's not getting out of something," I said. "That's maintaining it." He ran his hands over his face. "You don't understand how complicated it got," he said. "I understand exactly how simple it was for you," I replied. He looked at me then, really looked. And I could see it. The moment he realized he wasn't getting control back. Not through charm. Not through explanation. Not through guilt. So he shifted. "You went through my stuff," he said. There it was. The deflection. I nodded. "Yeah, that's not okay," he said. "No," I agreed. "Neither is building 2 lives and letting one of them pay for the other." He didn't like that. I could see it in the way his jaw tightened. "I never asked you to do that," he said. That one landed differently. Because technically, he was right. "You didn't have to," I said. He didn't respond. We sat there in silence for a few seconds. Then I said the thing that mattered most. "I'm done." He looked up. "Just like that?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "What about everything we built?" he pressed. I shook my head slightly. "You built 2 things," I said. "I was only part of one of them." He opened his mouth again, but I cut him off. "You need to leave." There was no anger in my voice. That's what made it final. He sat there for a second longer, like he was deciding whether to push again. Then he stood up. Slowly. Like he was trying to hold on to whatever version of control he had left. "This isn't how I wanted this to go," he said. I didn't respond. Because at that point, what he wanted didn't matter. He grabbed his keys. Paused at the door. Like he expected me to say something. I didn't. So he left. Just like that. No shouting. No scene. Just gone. The silence after was different than it had ever been before. Heavier. But clearer. Like something that had been sitting on my chest for months had finally been lifted. It's been a few months since then. I wish I could say I bounced back immediately. I didn't. It took time to process how much I had given. Not just financially. Emotionally. Mentally. All the energy I had put into solving something that was never fully mine to solve. I'm still rebuilding my savings. That part stings. Seeing the numbers go back up slowly, knowing how long it took to build them the first time. But the difference now is, they're mine again. As for him, I don't know everything that happened after. I know he and Maria aren't together anymore. She told me a few weeks later that things fell apart quickly once everything came out. Apparently, there were more inconsistencies. More things that didn't add up. I wasn't the only one he had been lying to. That didn't surprise me. It just confirmed what I already knew. And me? I'm quieter now. More careful. Not with money. With people. Because I keep coming back to the same thought. If I hadn't seen that email, if I hadn't noticed the numbers, how long would it have gone on? How much more would I have given? How much deeper would I have gotten into something that was never real in the first place? I don't regret helping. That's the part that's complicated. I regret who I helped. And I think that's the part I'm still trying to understand. Because where's the line between being supportive and being used without realizing it? I don't know. I just know I crossed it. So I guess the real question is, was I wrong for stepping in at all, or just wrong for not seeing what was right in front of me?